All right, so after doing 3 thumbnail sketches, I've come up with the composition that I want, and I want to place my shell kind of over to the right a little bit, not directly in the center of the picture, but just slightly over to the right. And I've given it a 3/4 turn, and I'm ready to start the cross contours. Now, I'm going to commit going one direction to start with. Okay, the reason being is that I don't want to create a grid like going both directions in equal amounts, because you get too much. In this type of drawing, it's too much information. You don't need that much because you're going to be using other material to create form as well. Okay, so before I even start, I want to kind of give myself an indication of where I'm going to begin and end. Remember those guidelines? So I'm going to start. I have my number 4B charcoal pencil. I'm going to start with a couple guidelines. Okay, and ultimately I want my shell to be around slightly more than half the size of my page, you know, between half and 2/3. Okay, remember the rule of thirds. So I'm going to push it just past half. Okay, so I'm going to, looking at my shell, and I have it sitting over there, and it's lit from, you know, the upper, slightly over to the left from behind a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and just like give some indication of where it's going to begin and end before I even, you know, commit to it, right? So I'm going to use these little registration guide marks. See, it's just a little mark. You see that? See that little mark there? I'm going to start with that. That's going to be the bottom. And then I'm just going to kind of work my way. I'm not even connecting. There's another registration mark right there that I want to have. Just so that I know where my shell is going to begin, I'm going to put one right here because that's kind of towards the end, the bottom end. And then I'm going to add another one there. And then I'm just going to kind of shape it out. Okay, and then this comes up and it does a little bit of that. So looking at that, I can automatically say, oh, that's looking a little small. So I'm going to extend this out a little. Okay, I'm going to make that bigger so that it increases the size of my shell. Okay, so I'm also trying to make it fit within the plane here, the camera. So hopefully that works. Okay, so I have my registration marks, right? There's another one that turns the plane. Okay, so basically I have an idea of like where it's going to fit in the picture, right? So that'll help me start describing this, and I won't start and get into the detail and not know where I'm going, and then it might end up off the page, or I might end up with a drawing too small. So ultimately, you know, I want it to fit a little bit more, you know, as it's sitting. I want it to occupy a good chunk of my paper. Okay, you know, somewhere between a half and a third, 2/3. All right, with that, now remember that trick that we had? So with these marks that kind of helped me describe where to begin and end, and where planes shift, I'm going to go ahead and just make a couple marks. And I put a little mark right down the middle just so I know, very lightly, mind you. And in order to, I'm going to start with some straight marks, right? Just to kind of give me an indication of like where I'm going with this. And they're light marks, right? So there's that. So, and then I'm going to just start shaping this thing out. Without overcommitting. And I'm using a really light touch, pinky up, okay? And I'm using fairly straight marks where I can, okay? Also, pay attention, like a lot of your shells have like a little nose. No, like you want to pay attention to where the side of your shell is, right? The side and where that nose is, and you want to pay attention to this distance. So I'm looking at my nose, and it's about 2/3 down, and just about, you know, just a hair past. So I'm putting my little nose right there. So that way, you know, it's a 3/4 turn, but, you know, And when you draw that nose, I always just kind of focus on the bottom part where the shadow is. Okay, and then from there I can begin to like, and I'm just drawing little marks to help me start to shape this out. Pushing a little bit where it's in shadow and lifting. Lifting where the highlights are, okay? So there's kind of the no button. I'll commit to that. That's probably a good size right there. Okay, and then it turns here, and then I have the next part kind of comes up off of that. And I'm noticing that this, first I'm going to go ahead and give it the initial shape, and then I'm going to scallop it because I'm noticing that there's scallops. But notice how I'm not carving a contour that's all the same width. I'm kind of lifting and pushing and coaxing that thing out a little bit. Okay, and then I'm noticing that there's like little scallops on this. I'm just going to kind of coax it out a little bit. When I say coax, I use that term a lot. I mean, don't chisel the mark out. Okay. Then from there is another section that comes out off of there. Pay attention to where things start and end too, right? So everything is kind of coming, wrapping around this area here like that, okay? And there's another section, and I'm gonna, I keep measuring off, okay, so this is off of there, so another section that kind of comes around, and it's much bigger. And it comes and sort of tucks right and meets this section. Actually, it goes a little bit before that. And there's another one that comes out and meets this section. Okay. And then over here, I'm just going to come off of here, and then there's a ridge right here. And then this ridge sort of meets that section. Now, sometimes you're not going to see your cross contours, okay? You just won't see them. You have to invent them, okay? Because your shell won't always provide a cross contour. Remember, the cross contour is what is going to help you shape out your shell following. And then this is really important. When you get to the bottom there, wrap it around. You're following. I start, because it's light, the light's coming this way. I'm going to start light. And as I come across, I'm going to push a little bit heavier and wrap it down. Okay? And that's what creates the form. And remember this, as it goes back into space, the contours get a little closer together. Remember those electric poles you drew in linear perspective? Well, the same kind of rule applies. And I'm also looking at the shell to see that it changes direction a little bit too towards the end here. And then it kind of comes out, comes down and over. Okay, so that is basically what that shell is going to look like to start. That's the beginning of my cross contour. Okay, now I will make other contours that follow the direction, but I'm going to use the Conte to do that so that I don't create a gridlock. So I'm just going to, I'm not even painting in the color or anything like that. I'm just giving myself the basic framework for my drawing. Okay, so that is, in a nutshell, in a seashell, the beginnings of my cross contour drawing. Right now I'm going to go ahead and build up other materials here to create more depth. Okay, I'm going to use wet material. So after I've laid out my cross contours, and you know, also you don't have to put contours that start all the way in the end. You can add some, like if you see an area that has other contours, you can go in, like if you want to create a little more, let's say you wanted to create a little more depth or shadow, you can have some cross contours that come down only part of the shell, right? And that'll also help create, and then remember that thing about overlapping? You see how this contour is over that one? I would come down, light, 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 and then push hard right there, right? And then tuck this behind there. See that? See how that works? And then here I would just add a few more, bending them in the same direction. What that does is just kind of creates a little bit more form. I might even add a little up here and kind of break them up. I might start a little bit higher, push down, a little higher, push down, a little higher, push down. Okay? So that's going to give you some depth too. Push that, and it'll give you a little form. You know, and I'm not even using hatch and cross hatch. This is cross contour. You're just using contour. I'm going to move the camera a little bit to create form. It's really a fun way to draw. It's different. You're not shading yet. You're just creating form using contour, not shading, right? And then those sections that you see, you can then, you know, like here, I'm going to push that a little heavier. Here, I'll push a little heavier. Here, I'll push a little heavier. And then here, I'll push a little heavier. And that creates form as well. All right. And then you'll see that in here, this is shadow. Now, I'm not gonna outline, I'm just kind of gonna reference where my cast shadow is so that I know where it's gonna be. So I just put a little mark there, you can see barely, all right? So because this is in shadow, I'm gonna go ahead and push that contour a little bit heavier, right? You wanna use contour where it creates weight too, okay? Or if something is coming towards you, like there, right? Then I would push a little heavier there too. All right, so there's my cross contour. Now my next step is simply, I have some coffee poured in there, and I'm gonna take my flat brush, okay? And I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna look at my shell, and in the shadowed areas, I'm gonna go ahead and just add some coffee right away. Okay, so I'm just dipping my brush right in the coffee. Okay, and then I have some blotter paper right next to me. Sorry, I ran away for a second. I have some blotter paper, you know, just folded up drawing paper that I can use to apply before. You don't want to oversaturate your drawing. So I'm taking my coffee, right, dipping my brush in, and I'm just taking a piece of paper and I'm blotting it right on there, okay? See that? All right, let me go back to that. Okay, so with my blotter paper, let me just back out a little bit in case I'm cutting anything off. With my dip brush and my coffee, I'm just gonna go ahead and start in the shadowed areas. And I'm just going to build, and you'll notice how, and while I'm applying this, I'm also thinking about the shape of the shell and how it changes direction. Okay, I'm not just brushing straight across planes. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and right now I'm just adding coffee to areas that are in shadow. Really that simple. I'm going to stay away from the highlighted areas for now. Later on I'll add more. And the more you let it drag across the charcoal, the darker it's going to get. And the way to get around that, if that's something that you don't want, is to dip often and wipe your brush off. Okay, so I'm just going to form that out. You know, I'm going to go ahead and use some of this coffee and charcoal to create a little bit of shadow work too. I'm just going to brush that, dip it, clean it, so that it's not quite as dark in this area because it's not as dark. I'm just going to build there. And I'm just building slowly, and I'm using my flat brush. And I'm going to go ahead and build that out. Just to start with. Then I might take a smaller brush, right? A little round, dip it in coffee, and that way I can get to some smaller areas. Remember, everything's like a little egg, okay? I'm looking at this, and everything is going to be formed out. It starts by here, and then when you get to the light areas, the dark areas become light, and the light areas become dark. It kind of switches direction. Okay, so that's going to help form that out in a nice way. Go ahead and give that a little form, staying away from the highlights. And I noticed that there's a little bit of shadow work in here too. Because there's a little valley. So there's peaks and valleys. Peaks and valleys. Then up here, I noticed that there's a big shift right here of plane. You know, that I can create a little shadow right in here. And here. And here. Okay, so you see how I'm kind of using a lot of different layers? Okay, now, next step is to block in the background. Okay, so just with my big flat and coffee, don't dilute the coffee and water. It's just straight, like if you're making a cup of coffee. I'm going to go ahead and just hit the background. Stay away from the highlighted areas on your shell. You're just going to start brushing in, and don't oversaturate. Make sure you use blotting paper. And basically I'm just using a folded up piece of drawing paper as blotter paper. I'm going to go ahead and just build the background, right? See that? Take it all the way to the edge of your shell and brush in the whole area all the way around your shell. Okay, so I'm going to do that. Keep your brush going so you don't have marks. You want to keep it moving. So you try not to create too many brush marks. Your brush marks are going to be there, you know, and it's part of this process. It's not, you know, there's going to be definitely some expressive marks in this drawing, right? It's a more physical drawing, less cerebral than the drawings you've been doing. It's going to be more expressive and more physical. The material has kind of more of a life to it, more of an expressive life, and celebrate that, okay? And remember, this is just the beginning. So I'm going to go ahead and just block this in. Eventually, you're going to do 3 or 4 coats in the background, and you know you're just going to continue to add more and more layers as you go. Okay, so let me wrap up this part, and then I'll do then I'm going to speed myself through this to get to the end of the drawing. I will speed it up. You know, this is going to be a somewhat abbreviated version, just because I don't want you guys, I want to keep your attention, and you know, this drawing, start to finish, is going to be about 5-hour drawing. So, you know, I want you develop it out nicely. Notice how I didn't block in the cast shadow yet, right? I'm going to save that for later. What I'm going to do for that is I'm going to add a little ink to my coffee and actually paint in the cast shadow to create a nice cast shadow that has some depth to it. Brush all the way to the edge, all the way out to the edge of your tape, so that when you pull the tape, you have a nice crisp edge that changes, you know, that ends the drawing, and that way it's more satisfying. All right, so there's my first pass. I will go ahead and do 3 or 4 more layers in the background, and I will build up again more layers on the shell. Eventually you're gonna have a coffee on everything, okay? And then, so I'm gonna stop when I get to a point where I'm gonna add color and stuff. Okay, so here I'm adding more layers of the coffee, letting layers dry in between. That's very important. Let it dry, then I reapply, hitting the background and the core shadows, some more on the shell. And then you can see there, I'm actually dry brushing. I'm wiping a little of the coffee off, and then I'm dragging across the charcoal to create these little streaks with the brush marks, called dry brushing. Try it.